The Arizona sun was merciless that October morning in 1871, beating down on the endless expanse of red dirt and scattered sagebrush that stretched toward the distant mountains. Jack Callahan rode his usual patrol of the boundary between his ranch and the open territory, checking for signs of cattle thieves or worse, Apache raiders who have been increasingly active since the latest broken treaty. At 34, Jack had the weathered look of a man who had survived 15 years on the frontier through equal parts luck and careful judgment. His ranch, carved from this harsh landscape through back-breaking work and stubborn determination, represented everything he had managed to build after losing his family farm in Missouri to debt and drought. The sound of vultures circling ahead caught his attention first, their harsh cries cutting through the desert silence in a way that always meant death. Jack spurred his horse toward the rocky outcropping where the scavengers gathered, expecting to find a dead steer, or perhaps the remains of some unfortunate traveler who had underestimated the brutality of the Arizona desert. What he found instead made his blood run cold. A young native woman lay motionless beside the trail, her dark hair matted with dried blood, her traditional dress torn and stained with evidence of violence. She couldn't have been more than 20, and even unconscious and injured, Jack could see that she was beautiful. The kind of beauty that would have made her valuable as a commodity in the terrible trade that flourished between some settlers and tribal communities. Jack dismounted carefully, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle across his saddle as he scanned the surrounding rocks for signs of ambush. The desert held only silence and the whisper wind through the scrub brush, but Jack had learned to trust his instincts, and something about this scene felt deliberately staged. Kneeling beside the woman, Jack checked for signs of life and found a weak but steady pulse. Her injuries appeared to be from a beating rather than a knife or bullet. Someone had wanted her alive but compliant. Dark bruises covered her arms and face, and a head wound had left her unconscious but not necessarily dying. "Easy there," Jack murmured as he lifted her carefully onto his horse, though she showed no signs of consciousness. "Let's get you somewhere safe." The ride back to his ranch took the better part of an hour, with Jack constantly checking the horizon for signs of pursuit. He had no idea who had left the woman to die or why, but experience had taught him that such discoveries rarely came without complications. Jack's ranch house was modest but solid. Adobe walls thick enough to stop bullets, with water from a reliable well in defensive positions that had kept him alive through 3 separate Apache raids. He carried the unconscious woman inside and laid her on his bed, then began the careful process of cleaning and treating her wounds. As he worked, Jack found himself wondering about her story. The quality of her clothing suggested she came from a family of some standing within her tribe, and the nature of her injuries indicated systematic abuse rather than random violence. Someone had purchased her, used her badly, and then discarded her in the desert to die. The realization filled Jack with a cold anger that surprised him with its intensity. He had seen enough cruelty on the frontier to become somewhat hardened to human suffering, but something about this particular act of callousness struck him as inexcusable. "Who did this to you?" he asked quietly as he bandaged a head wound, though he expected no answer from the unconscious woman. As evening approached, Jack prepared simple food and settled into his chair beside the bed to keep watch through the night. He had treated injured people before, both white settlers and Indians, and he knew that the next 24 hours would determine whether his unexpected patient would survive or join the too long list of frontier casualties. But as darkness fell over the desert, Jack began to hear sounds that made him reach for his rifle. The soft whisper of moccasin feet moving around his house, the barely audible scrape of metal against stone, and the kinds of careful movements that spoke of trained warriors positioning themselves for attack. Through his window, Jack caught glimpses of painted faces and the gleam of steel in moonlight. The woman's people had come for her, and they clearly viewed him as an enemy rather than a rescuer. Jack checked his weapons and settled in for what promised to be a long and dangerous night. Whatever happened, he was committed now to protecting the woman he had found dying in the desert, even if her own brothers saw his protection as another form of captivity. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test everything Jack believed about honor, justice, and the possibility of understanding across the cultural divide that had turned Arizona territory into a battleground between two peoples fighting for the same land. The soft sound of moccasins on gravel told Jack that his house was surrounded. Through the narrow windows of his adobe ranch house, He could see shadows moving with the practiced stealth of Navajo warriors, their faces painted for war, their weapons ready for violence. Jack positioned himself where he could watch both the unconscious woman and the approaches to his home. His rifle was loaded and ready, but he kept it pointed toward the floor, a gesture he hoped would be interpreted as defensive rather than aggressive if the warriors could see him through the windows. "I know you're out there," Jack called in a voice loud enough to carry through the walls, but calm enough to avoid sounding like a challenge. "I found her dying on the trail. I'm trying to help her." The response came in the form of a voice speaking accented but clear English from somewhere near his front door. "You will release our sister, or you will die in that house." Jack felt his heart hammering against his ribs, but forced his voice to remain steady. "She's badly hurt. Moving her now could kill her. Let me show you her injuries." "White man's words are wind," came the reply. "You have stolen from us before. We know your kind." The accusation stung, because Jack understood the history behind it. White settlers had indeed stolen land, livestock, people, dignity. And the pattern of broken promises and casual cruelty had created a cycle of violence that seemed impossible to break. "I'm not like those men," Jack called back. "I found her left for dead. I brought her here to save her life, not to keep her prisoner." A different voice, younger and angrier, responded with words Jack didn't understand, but whose meaning was clear enough. Threats and challenges that spoke of barely controlled rage. The woman on Jack's bed stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open for the first time since he'd found her. Jack moved carefully to her side, speaking softly. "Easy. You're safe. You're hurt, but you're going to be all right." Her dark eyes focused on his face with obvious effort, taking in his features and the unfamiliar surroundings. When she tried to speak, only a whisper emerged, but Jack could hear the intelligence and strength in her voice despite her weakness. "My brothers," she managed to ask. "They're outside," Jack replied honestly. "They think I'm holding you prisoner. Can you tell them that I'm trying to help you?" The woman struggled to sit up, and Jack helped support her despite the obvious pain the movement caused. She looked toward the window where painted faces were visible in the moonlight. Ho Teen, she called weakly, using what Jack assumed was one of her brother's names. "This man found me dying. He has shown honor." The response from outside was immediate and heated. Rapid conversation in Navajo that Jack couldn't understand, but whose tone suggested argument and disagreement among the warriors. "They don't trust white men," the woman explained to Jack, her voice growing stronger with effort. "Too many lies, too much stealing. They think you planned to sell me like the others did." "What others?" Jack asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "The rancher Morrison bought me from traders as peace gift for his workers," she said, her voice carrying pain that went beyond physical injury. "When I fought back, he beat me and left me in the desert to die." Jack felt the cold anger return, stronger than before. James Morrison owned a large spread about 50 miles south, and Jack had heard rumors about his methods for maintaining discipline among his men and dealing with local tribes. "Morrison's men did this to you?" The woman nodded slowly. "Said I was payment for safe passage through our lands. Said I should be grateful to serve white men instead of living like savage." The conversation outside had grown more intense, with multiple voices arguing in rapid Navajo. The woman listened carefully, then looked at Jack with an expression that mixed gratitude with worry. "My eldest brother, Hosteen, wants to burn this house with you inside," she translated. "The younger ones want to take me and leave, but they argue about whether I speak truth about your intentions." Jack understood that he was balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong word or gesture could trigger a massacre, but backing down might be interpreted as weakness or guilt. "What's your name?" Jack asked the woman. "Ayana," she replied. "It means eternal blossom in our language." "Ayana, I'm Jack Callahan. I swear to you that I will not let anyone hurt you again, whether they're white or Indian, but I need your help to convince your brothers that I'm not their enemy." Ayana studied his face in the lamplight, her dark eyes searching for signs of deception or hidden motives. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded slowly and began to speak toward the window in her native language. Jack couldn't understand her words, but he could hear the strength and conviction in her voice as she spoke to her brothers. The response from outside was less heated, more questioning, as if she had introduced new information that required consideration. I told him you could have done anything to me while I was unconscious, but instead you treated my wounds and gave me your own bed, Ayana explained. I told him you speak with honesty and show respect for our customs by not looking at me inappropriately while caring for my injuries. Jack felt relief beginning to replace the tension in his chest, but he knew they weren't safe yet. Trust would have to be earned through actions rather than words, and the night was far from over. Dawn broke over the Arizona desert with a harsh clarity that made everything visible, including the 3 Navajo warriors who sat motionless as stone sculptures around Jack's ranch house. During the long night, they had moved from concealment to positions where they could watch Jack's every movement while remaining ready to act if he proved treacherous. Jack had spent the dark hours caring for Ayana and trying to demonstrate through his actions that his intentions were honorable. He had brought her water, changed her bandages, and prepared simple food while maintaining a respectful distance that acknowledged both her vulnerability and her dignity as a person rather than property. "Your brothers are very patient," Jack observed as he helped Ayana sit up to eat some broth he had prepared from dried beef and wild herbs. "They are waiting to see your true nature," Ayana replied, her voice noticeably stronger after a night of rest and care. "Among our people, we believe that time reveals all truths. A man cannot pretend to be good for very long if evil lives in his heart." Jack understood that he was being evaluated according to standards very different from those of white frontier society. The Navajo warriors weren't interested in his words or promises. They were watching how he treated their sister when he thought no one was judging him. "What will convince them that I mean no harm?" Jack asked. "Continue to act with honor," Ayana said simply. "Show that you see me as a person deserving of respect, not as a possession to be used." Through the window, Jack could see the eldest of the 3 warriors, presumably Hosteen, rising from his position and walking slowly toward the house. He moved with the controlled grace of a man confident in his own power, but willing to consider possibilities other than violence. Jack made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. He opened his front door and stepped outside, his hands visible and empty, to meet Ayana's brother face to face. Hosteen was perhaps 40 years old, with the weathered features of a man who had spent his life in harsh country. His face was painted with traditional war markings, but his dark eyes held intelligence rather than blind rage as he studied Jack from 6 feet away. "You speak our language?" Hosteen asked in heavily accented English. "No," Jack replied honestly, "but I understand that some things don't require words. Your sister was dying when I found her. I couldn't let that happen and still call myself a man." Hosteen's expression remained unreadable as he processed Jack's response. "Many white men take our women. They say they help, but they steal." "I know," Jack acknowledged, "and I know why you don't trust me. But look at your sister. Look at how I've cared for her. Judge me by my actions, not by what other white men have done." From inside the house, Ayana called out in Navajo, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. Hosteen listened carefully, then responded with questions that prompted longer explanations from his sister. "She tells me you gave her your bed while you slept in a chair," Hosteen said finally. "She says you treated her wounds like you would treat your own sister, with care, but without looking where you should not look." Jack nodded. "That's true. She says you became angry when she told you how Morrison's men hurt her. Angry like family becomes angry when family is harmed." "Also true," Jack confirmed. "What was done to her was wrong. No one deserves to be treated like property and thrown away when they resist." For the first time, something that might have been approval flickered in Hosteen's eyes. "You speak truth," he said slowly. "But speaking truth and living truth are different things. We will watch longer." The next 3 days established a routine unlike anything Jack had ever experienced. The 3 Navajo warriors maintained their vigil around his ranch, never threatening but never far away. Ayana grew stronger under Jack's careful nursing, and gradually began to move around the house and help with simple tasks. During this time, Jack found himself learning about Navajo customs and beliefs through Ayana's patient explanations. She taught him which plants could be used for medicine, how to prepare food in ways that honor the life that had been given for sustenance, and something about the complex relationship between her people and the land they considered sacred. Your people see land as something to be owned, Ayana observed as they sat together on his porch watching the sunset. Our people see land as something that owns us, that gives us life and expects care in return. I never thought about it that way, Jack admitted, but I suppose that explains why we keep fighting over the same pieces of ground. Much fighting comes from not understanding different ways of seeing same things. Ayana agreed. Your people want security through ownership. Our people want security through harmony. Jack found himself genuinely interested in these philosophical discussions, but he was also acutely aware that they were being overheard and evaluated by Ayana's brothers. Every word, every gesture, every moment of interaction was being weighed against their experience of white men and their expectations of how their sister should be treated. On the evening of the third day, Hosteen approached the house again, this time accompanied by his two younger brothers. The war paint had been washed from their faces, and their weapons, while still present, were no longer held in ready positions. "We have watched," Hosteen announced. "We have seen how you care for our sister. We believe you speak truth about your intentions." Jack felt relief flood through him, but he sensed that some kind of resolution was still required. "What happens now?" "Now we must decide what is right," Hosteen replied. "Our sister cannot return to our village. Morrison's men will look for her there, and their presence will bring danger to our families. But she cannot stay here alone with you. That would bring different dangers and dishonor both your peoples." Jack understood the dilemma. Ayana was caught between two worlds, safe in neither, with limited options for building a future that wouldn't compromise her dignity or endanger her family. "There might be another way," Jack said slowly, an idea forming that felt both natural and terrifying. "If Ayana agrees and if you approve, she could stay here as my wife. That would give her legal protection under white man's law and honor under both our customs." The proposal hung in the desert air like something that could either resolve their impossible situation or make it infinitely more complicated. The silence that followed Jack's marriage proposal stretched across the desert evening like a hell breath. Hosteen's dark eyes moved between Jack and his sister, weighing implications that went far beyond simple romance or convenience. This was a decision that would affect not only Ayana's future, but the relationships between their peoples in this part of Arizona territory. "Marriage between our peoples is not a simple thing," Hosteen said finally. "Different laws, different customs, different ways of understanding what marriage means." Jack nodded, understanding that he was proposing something unprecedented in his experience. "I know it's complicated, but Ayana needs protection that I can provide, and He paused, searching for words to express feelings that had developed during their days together. "I've come to care about what happens to her, not as property, but as a person I respect and want to keep safe." Ayana had listened to the conversation with careful attention, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. Now she spoke directly to her eldest brother in Navajo, her voice carrying the strength that had helped her survive Morrison's brutality and the desert's attempt to claim her life. The conversation between the siblings continued for several minutes, with the two younger brothers occasionally adding comments or questions. Jack watched the interplay of expressions and gestures, understanding that they were discussing implications he couldn't even imagine. "My sister says she's been watching you as carefully as we have," Hosteen translated eventually. "She says you show her respect without expecting gratitude, care without demanding payment. She says you become angry about injustice to strangers, which shows good heart." "She's right about all of that," Jack confirmed. "But I want her to know that if she agrees to this marriage, it will be real in every sense. Not just a legal arrangement, but a commitment to build a life together." Ayana looked directly at Jack for the first time since the marriage proposal, her dark eyes searching his face with the same careful evaluation she had used to judge his character during her recovery. "In my people's tradition," she said slowly, "marriage is partnership between equals. Husband and wife work together, make decisions together, care for each other's welfare. Is this your understanding also?" "It is," Jack replied without hesitation. "I've seen too many marriages where the woman becomes property instead of partner. That's not what I want. And you understand that I am not white woman who will forget her people and her customs?" Ayana continued, "I will always be Navajo in my heart, even if I live in your world." Jack felt the weight of her question and the importance of his answer. I wouldn't want you to forget who you are. Your customs, your beliefs, your connection to your family. Those things make you who you are. I want to learn about them, not replace them. Ho Tin had been listening to this exchange with growing approval, but now he raised a practical concern that showed his understanding of the challenges they would face. White settlements will not accept Navajo wife easily, he pointed out. There will be those who see this marriage as betrayal of your people, and those who see our sister as traitor to hers. Jack had been thinking about this problem since making his proposal. There are other mixed couples in the territory, he said. It's not common, but it's not impossible. And my ranch is isolated enough that we wouldn't have to deal with community prejudice on a daily basis. But you would have to go to town for supplies, for business, Ayana observed. I would have to face the stares and the whispers of people who think I don't belong with you. We would face that together, Jack said firmly. And anyone who can't treat my wife with respect isn't someone whose opinion matters to me. The conversation continued as the stars came out over the desert, with practical details being discussed alongside deeper questions about cultural compatibility and long-term consequences. Jack found himself impressed by the thoroughness with which Ayana and her brothers examined every aspect of proposed arrangement. There is one more thing, Ho Tin said as the discussion seemed to be reaching conclusion. If you marry our sister, you become connected to our family, our clan. This means responsibilities as well as privileges. Jack understood that he was being offered something rare, acceptance into a Native American family structure that most white men never even glimpsed, let alone joined. What kind of responsibilities, he asked. Protection of family when needed, Ho Tin explained. Sharing of resources during hard times. Respect for our ways even when you don't understand them. And promise that any children born to this marriage will know both their heritage, white and Navajo. The magnitude of what was being offered made Jack's throat tight with emotion. These people, who had every reason to distrust white men, were willing to accept him as family if he proved worthy of their sister. I accept those responsibilities, Jack said solemnly, and I promise to honor them. Ayana rose from her seat and walked to where Jack stood, extending her hand in a gesture that combined white customs with her own people's traditions. Then I accept your proposal, she said simply, not because I have no other choices, but because I choose you as the man I want to build a life with. Jack took her hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of a lifetime of hard work and the strength that had carried her through recent trauma. And I choose you, he replied, not because I need a wife, but because I want you as my partner in everything. Ho Tin stepped forward and placed his hands on both their shoulders, speaking in Navajo words that Jack couldn't understand, but whose meaning felt like blessing and acceptance. We will stay for the ceremony, Ho Tin announced, to witness this union and carry word back to our people that our sister has chosen wisely. As they began planning for a wedding ceremony that would honor both traditions, Jack realized that he was not just gaining a wife, but entering into a relationship with an entire culture that would challenge and enrich his understanding of what it meant to be truly civilized. The decision to marry Ayana was transforming him from a solitary rancher into someone connected to family, community, and traditions that stretch back centuries. It was perhaps the most important choice he would ever make. The wedding ceremony took place at sunrise 3 days later, in the open space between Jack's house and a desert that stretched toward the sacred mountains of Ayana's people. Under Ho Tin's guidance, they created a ritual that honored both white and Navajo traditions, weaving together customs that had never been combined before. Jack wore his best clothes, clean work pants, a white shirt, and a vest that had belonged to his father. Ayana wore a traditional Navajo dress of deep blue velvet with silver buttons and turquoise jewelry that caught the early morning light like fallen pieces of sky. Her hair was arranged in the complex style of married women among her people, adorned with silver ornaments that had been passed down through generations of her family. In Navajo tradition, Ho Tin explained as he prepared to conduct the ceremony, marriage is not just union of two people, but joining of two clans, two families, two sets of responsibilities to community and land. Jack nodded, understanding that he was participating in something far more complex than the simple civil ceremonies he had witnessed in frontier towns. This was a recognition of marriage as a social contract that extended far beyond the couple themselves. The ceremony began with Ho Tin speaking in Navajo, calling upon ancestors and spirits to witness and bless the union. Though Jack couldn't understand the words, he could feel the power and solemnity of prayers that connected this moment to countless generations of marriages that had created and sustained Ayana's people. Ayana translated portions of the ceremony for Jack's benefit. He asked the spirits of earth and sky to make our partnership fruitful, she explained. He asks that we be given wisdom to solve problems together and strength to protect each other through difficulties. When it came time for vows, they had decided to speak in English so that Jack could express his commitments in his own words, but using concepts that reflected Navajo understanding of marriage responsibilities. Ayana, Jack said, taking her hands in his, I promise to work beside you as equal partner in all we do. I promise to respect your people and your customs as part of who you are. I promise to protect you not as property, but as the person I choose to share my life with. Ayana's vows carried the strength and dignity that had impressed Jack from their first conversation. Jack, she said, her voice clear in the desert air, I promise to be your partner in building something good from the life we choose together. I promise to bring the wisdom of my people to our marriage and to help you understand the connections between all living things. I promise to stand with you against those who would divide us because we come from different worlds. Ho's team produced a piece of turquoise and a piece of silver, explaining their significance as they were incorporated into rings that Jack had fashioned from materials traded with a traveling metalsmith. Turquoise represents sky and healing, Ho's team said as he blessed the rings. Silver represents earth and strength. Together, they symbolize balance between different elements that create harmony. As Jack placed a ring on Ayana's finger, and she placed his ring with careful precision, both understood that they were creating something entirely new, a marriage that would have to be defined by their own choices rather than existing cultural templates. The ceremony concluded with sharing of corn mush and water, symbolic foods that represented sustenance and life, and the promise that they would share all resources as one family. Jack found the ritual both strange and deeply moving, recognizing that he was being inducted into ways of understanding community and responsibility that white culture rarely acknowledged. Now you are married in the eyes of our people, Ho Tin announced. But you must also be married in the eyes of your law, or there will be those who refuse to recognize this union. Jack had already made arrangements for this necessity. The territorial judge will be here this afternoon, he said. Doc Morrison sent word to the county seat, and Judge Parker is riding out to perform the legal ceremony. The arrival of Judge Parker and his small entourage later that day created an interesting cultural moment, as the elderly jurist found himself conducting a legal wedding for a couple who were already married according to traditions far older than territorial law. This is highly irregular, Judge Parker observed as he reviewed the situation. But I suppose frontier life requires flexible approaches to legal formalities. The civil ceremony was brief and businesslike, focused on the legal protections and responsibilities that marriage would provide under territorial and federal law. Jack appreciated the practical value of these protections, but found the legal ritual much less meaningful than the morning spiritual ceremony. Now you're married twice, Dr. Morrison observed with amusement as he witnessed the proceedings. That should be enough to satisfy anyone's concerns about the legitimacy of your union. As evening approached and their guests prepared to depart, Jack and Ayana found themselves alone for the first time as husband and wife. The transition felt both natural and momentous, as if they had simply formalized a partnership that had been developing since the morning he found her dying in the desert. Are you satisfied with your choice? Ayana asked as they sat together on their porch, watching Ho Tin and his brothers disappear into the desert darkness. More than satisfied, Jack replied honestly. I feel like I've gained not just a wife, but a teacher, a partner, and a connection to something larger than myself. And I feel like I have found someone who sees me as I truly am, Ayana said. Not as property, not as exotic curiosity, but as person worthy of respect and love. As they prepared for their first night as a legally married couple, both Jack and Ayana understood that they had taken the first step in what would be a lifelong process of building bridges between their different worlds, creating something new and unprecedented from the combination of their separate traditions and shared commitment to honor and mutual respect. Their marriage was more than personal choice. It was an act of faith in the possibility that understanding could overcome prejudice, that love could bridge cultural divides, and that two people committed to treating each other with dignity could create something beautiful despite the opposition they would inevitably face from both their communities. 6 months after their wedding, Jack and Ayanna had established rhythms of daily life that reflected the blending of their different cultural backgrounds into something entirely their own. Their ranch had become a place where Navajo methods of sustainable land use combined with white techniques of animal husbandry to create productivity that neither approach could have achieved alone. Ayanna had introduced Jack to plants and practices that improved the health of his cattle and horses while requiring less work and fewer external resources. Jack had shown Ayanna how to use certain tools and techniques that made household and ranch work more efficient without compromising the harmony with nature that her people valued. The land is responding well to our changes, Ayanna observed as they rode together through pastures where native grasses were thriving alongside Jack's livestock. When you work with natural patterns instead of fighting them, everything grows stronger. Jack had come to deeply appreciate his wife's knowledge and perspective on ranch management, but he had also discovered that their marriage offered him insights into human relationships that his solitary bachelor life had never provided. "I used to think success meant getting through each day without disaster," Jack admitted as they worked together to repair a section of fence damaged by winter storms. "Now I think it means building something that will be better tomorrow than it is today." Their personal relationship had developed into genuine partnership and deepening affection, but the outside world had not accepted their union with the same generosity that had characterized their family's responses. Several neighboring ranchers had made it clear that they disapproved of the marriage, and tensions with the local trading post had required Jack to travel farther for supplies rather than endure the hostility of merchants who saw Ayanna's presence as a betrayal of white solidarity. "People in town still stare," Ayanna reported after one of their monthly supply trips. "Some with curiosity, some with anger, some with something that looks like pity for you." "Let them stare," Jack replied firmly. "Our marriage isn't subject to community approval, and I'm not interested in the opinions of people who can't see your worth." But the social isolation had practical consequences that they couldn't entirely ignore. When Jack fell seriously ill with fever in early spring, none of their white neighbors offered assistance, leaving Ayanna to care for him alone, while managing all ranch responsibilities. "I sent word to my brothers," Ayanna told Jack during his recovery. "Hosteen and 2 others came to help with the cattle and horses while you were sick. They stayed until you were well enough to work again." The realization that his Navajo in-laws had provided support that his white neighbors had withheld was both humbling and enlightening for Jack. "What does that tell you about which community we really belong to?" he asked. "It tells me that family is defined by loyalty and care, not by blood or skin color," Ayanna replied. "Your neighbors may share your ancestry, but my brothers share your commitment to our welfare." The most serious challenge to their marriage came in late spring when territorial officials arrived with questions about Ayanna's legal status and the circumstances of their marriage. Political tensions between white settlements and native communities had increased following several violent incidents in other parts of territory, and there was pressure to regulate relationships between the two groups. There are concerns that mixed marriages might be used to circumvent restrictions on Indian land rights, explained Territorial Agent William Hayes during his official visit to their ranch. Some officials believe that Native women might marry white men to gain access to property ownership and citizenship, rights not available to their people. Jack felt anger rising at the implication that his marriage was some kind of legal scheme rather than genuine partnership. "Are you suggesting that my wife married me for fraudulent purposes?" he asked coldly. "I'm saying that the territorial government needs assurance that this marriage represents genuine personal choice rather than political maneuvering." Hayes replied carefully. "There are those who would use individual cases to justify broader restrictions on relationships between whites and Indians." Ayanna had listened to this conversation with growing understanding of the political forces that threatened to interfere with their personal lives. "What kind of assurance do you require?" she asked directly. Hayes seemed surprised by her directness and intelligence, as if he had expected a more subservient response. "Evidence that this marriage is authentic and beneficial to both parties," he said finally. "Testimony from reliable witnesses, demonstration of genuine partnership, proof that both parties entered the marriage voluntarily." Over the following week, Jack and Ayanna worked to provide the documentation and testimony that territorial officials required. Dr. Morrison vouched for the legitimacy of their relationship. Judge Parker confirmed the legal validity of their marriage ceremonies, and even several of Jack's more liberal neighbors provided statements about the obvious affection and mutual respect they had observed between the couple. "Your marriage appears to be exactly what you claim it to be," Agent Hayes concluded after reviewing all the evidence. "A genuine partnership between two people who chose each other freely and are building a successful life together." The official validation of their marriage was gratifying, but Jack and Ayanna both understood that external approval was less important than their own commitment to the life they were building together. "We have proven that love can overcome prejudice," Ayanna observed as they celebrated the resolution of their legal challenges. "But more importantly, we have proven it to ourselves." As their first year of marriage concluded, Jack and Ayanna looked forward to a future that would undoubtedly include continued challenges from a society not yet ready to accept relationships that cross cultural boundaries. But they had also created something unprecedented, a marriage that honored both their traditions while creating new possibilities for understanding between their peoples. Their ranch had become more than a place of business. It had become a demonstration that cooperation and mutual respect could create prosperity and happiness that neither culture could achieve alone. In a small way, their personal choice to build a life together was contributing to the larger possibility that different peoples might learn to live in harmony rather than constant conflict. Jack and Ayanna's love story was also a story about the courage required to choose understanding over prejudice, partnership over domination, and hope over fear. Choices that define not only their personal future, but the future of the territory they call home.